don't want me yelling to you? All right, I'll do my very best. And again, if you need to move closer, there are chairs here. You can just sit there and face me. I am so sorry. I have a tiny little voice, but I'll do my best. All right, so the problem that we're going to address today related to sexual discipleship and how we need to change our approach is in past generations, all the emphasis on what it looks like to honor God in our sexuality has been on behavior. And so here's what happens. You become a Christian, or a kid becomes a Christian, maybe even at this conference, they give their life to Christ, and they begin to share with you some of the things that they might be struggling with, or you discover that, hey, they're struggling with gender identity, or they're struggling with pornography, or they're sleeping with their boyfriend or girlfriend. And your next response is going to be, well, then now that you're a Christian, you can't do those things. God wants you to honor him with your sexuality. So you need to stop that behavior. And this is what we grew up hearing, that God, once you become a Christian, your sexual behavior needs to change, right? How well does that work? Even in our own lives, how effective has it been for somebody to tell you, stop looking at pornography, or stop lusting, or stop struggling? Yes, the Word of God says that behavior is important to change, but if there's no emphasis behind how that behavior changes, then we really begin to struggle with even the power of God. And so one paradigm shift that has really been helpful for me is to think about the difference between helping people understand sexual purity versus helping them understand sexual integrity. And so sexual purity is a concept that most of us grew up with in the church. We may still be teaching it. But sexual purity is sort of this all or nothing understanding of, am I honoring God with my sexuality? And for the young people we work with, most often we will communicate it as, don't have sex outside of marriage, right? And as long as you keep that virginity card, like you're good, you're following God. And as we talked about yesterday, there's some real problems with that message, even though it is biblical to save sexuality for marriage, or to save sexual intimacy for marriage. There's a whole lot of areas that we get confusion about. So for example, what about the young person who has experienced sexual trauma? And the research would show us that probably about 1 out of every 4, that's 25% of your young women, have experienced sexual trauma. And probably about 15 to 20% of your young men have experienced sexual trauma. Now you add on to that even the trauma of having been exposed to sexually explicit material like pornography at the ages of 9 or 10 or 11, where the brain isn't able to even process those kinds of images, the overflow of dopamine. That's traumatic. And so we've got these kids that are dealing with different forms of trauma, and all we tell them is God wants you to abstain from sexual activity. And they don't know what sexual purity looks like in terms of their woundedness. Or you think about the kid who's struggling with same-sex attraction or gender identity. Well, what does sexual purity look like for that young man or woman? Like, how did they begin to walk in that? Or you think about the kid who has already lost their virginity. I have kids that will come to me and say, hey, me and my boyfriend have already slept together, so we've already lost it. So why does God care if we continue to sleep together? Like, we can't be pure again. It's sort of gone. And so even when we talk about what happens if and when people get married, what does honoring God with your sexuality even look like then? What does it look like for us at our ages? Does sexual purity even matter? Like, let me just ask you a question to consider on your own heart. If you had to check a box of sexually pure or impure today, which box would you check? Do you even know? It's like, how do you even understand that in the larger context of life? And so what's been much more helpful for me is to talk to people about living with sexual integrity. Now, what's the difference? All right, that word integrity is a word that we often use to associate with character. If a person has integrity, it means, hey, you can trust them, they're of good character. But if you actually look at that word integrity, it comes from the Latin root word integer. Do we have any math nerds in here? Any math teachers? Yes, come on. None? They don't come to youth conference? All right, they're studying their math books. Well, I'll pretend to be one. So you probably took algebra, and you probably remember that word integer way back when. And an integer is what? Does anybody remember? Nobody remembers? There you go. It's a whole number. And what's so important about that is it can't be divided by anything. And so an integer is a number that can't be divided. And so we look at that word integrity, an integer, the root of it, it's saying that this represents something that's whole and undivided. So if we think about the opposite of integrity, we think about words like disintegrate or disintegration, where things are splitting apart. They don't hold together. And so we might talk about the integrity of a novel, which means the whole story makes sense. It all flows together. Or the integrity of a building structure, that it's sound, it's solid. And so when we talk about sexual integrity, what we're saying is that your life is an accurate reflection of who you say that you are. And for many of us, we have learned to split off our sexuality from the whole of who we say we are. And this is true not only of kids, it probably starts in adolescence, but it projects into adulthood, where we go to church and we worship God and we give him our life, but then we have this secret that we don't know how to tell anyone about. We have a struggle that we can't bring to church. We have issues in our life that we don't know how to pray for or get healing from. And kids learn at a very young age that because of the shame associated with sexuality, this is an aspect of them that gets split off instead of integrated into who God calls them to be as people. And so when I talk to kids or adults, I'm never going to talk about sexual purity, because all of us will feel like at some level we failed that test. And I'm going to talk about sexual integrity, which is the whole life surrender, including my sexuality, to who I say Jesus is and who he is, who says that I am. And the other thing that's great about sexual integrity is it's not a pass-fail test. It's something we grow and mature in. And some of the things that your kids are struggling with at 15 or 16 years old, we're going to give them a lot of grace because they're young. But we expect as they grow in their relationship with God and they grow in emotional maturity, that their integrity is going to become more complete. And so it's a maturation, it's a discipleship framework where it's not pass-fail. It's like, hey, where are you compared to where you were a year ago? Have you grown in sexual integrity? And we as adults continue to be challenged to grow in our sexual integrity. So when we talk about sexual integrity, we have to say that integrity will always begin with identity. I don't ever want to talk about sexual behavior first. I want to talk about integrity first. Now, why is that? Because if you're a whole, undivided person, then what is the most important thing about you that defines who you are? So, for example, let's say that you go to Chick-fil-A. I understand they have a Chick-fil-A here at Indiana Wesleyan. And, you know, like all good Christians go to Chick-fil-A, right? It's the Jesus chicken. So imagine you walk into Chick-fil-A and you walk in and it's a Sunday and it's open. Like, wait, what's going on here? It's Sunday. Don't you always crave Chick-fil-A on Sunday? Like you don't want any other day of the week? What is it with that? But not only is it Sunday, but you see burgers on the menu. Okay, what's wrong with this picture? Like Chick-fil-A lacks integrity at that point. They are eating the marketing department. They're eating the cows. They're not supposed to do that. Like Chick-fil-A is known for chicken. Chick-fil-A knows who they are. They know the centering principle of their restaurant, and so they're never going to offer you hamburgers, and they're never going to be open on Sunday because they know who they are. They're different from Burger King. In a similar way, I'm from the great state of Ohio. I grew up in Akron, Ohio. How many Buckeyes do we have in here? Yeah, lots of Buckeyes. All right, awesome. And so I grew up going to sports games with my dad from the time I was knee high. That was sort of like our bonding thing. And so he would always take me on my birthday, which is in September, to a Cleveland Browns or a Cleveland Indians game. And I grew up cheering for them. And so because I'm from Northeastern Ohio, I know how to dress when I go to a football game. I will look something like this. No, not really. I don't get that crazy. But I can promise you I would never go to a football game looking like this. And if you're from Ohio, especially the Northeastern Ohio, you know why this would be heretical, right? Like, we hate the Ravens. I'm sorry if you're a Ravens fan, like, we have unity in Christ, but never in football. And so where I grew up affects my affections in the sporting world. I cheer for a team because of who I am. It's an expression of my identity. In the same way, I would never have a flag like this waving in my backyard. Yeah? Do we have any Michigan people in here? No? Okay. You raised your hand slightly. All right. We love you, sister, but, like, give us grace here. But you see how my identity affects my affections. It affects my behavior. You might even tell that I have a little bit of that Ohio Midwest accent. It affects how I talk. And so my identity drives everything else. And when we talk to kids about their sexuality, we have to begin with identity. And identity is not just the issue of the LGBT community. I believe it's the identity of all of us. It's the question of all of us. One of the things that I think it's important to ask ourselves and to ask kids is, what is the most important thing about you? Like, if you had to choose one thing around which every other identity is going to take second chair, what is that one thing? Because there are a lot of things that are true about us. There's the sports team we cheer for, there's where we grew up, there's our racial and ethnic identity, there's a gender identity, there are our hobbies that we like, or maybe careers that we enter into. We're a brother or a sister, or son or daughter. We have all these identities, and they're true identities. But what is the one identity around which we form integrity? What is the most important thing about you? And our world would tell young people that the most important thing about you is your internal experience, who you think that you are, who you feel that you are. Whereas God's word would say that if you are a child of God, if you have given your life to Christ, there is no identity that is more central than that one. And every other identity comes under that lordship. It doesn't mean that God creates robots, but it means that my ethnic identity and my sports team's identity and my identity as a psychologist and all the other things that define me come under the lordship of Jesus Christ. Now, why is this so essential? This is so essential because we find that sexual behavior comes out of wounds of identity and misunderstood identity. And again, it's not just what the culture is telling kids about sexual and gender identity. It's things like shame. Shame is a disease of identity. And so kids that have experimented sexually, they've looked at pornography, kids that are struggling with gender identity, kids that have experienced sexual trauma, they already have shame related to their sexuality. And the research would show us that those kinds of experience actually prime us to act out sexually. Why does a kid look at pornography? Well, we can look at the brain and say, well, it's overloading the dopamine reward centers of the brain, and that's true. But what are they trying to run away from? What are they trying to cope with? And when we dig deeper, we find that underneath sexual struggles is real pain. When we look at struggles with transgenderism and gender fluidity, by and large, we see kids that have comorbid illnesses, mental illnesses like anxiety, depression, autism, ADHD that are not being addressed, and instead the sexual behavior becomes a symptom of acting that out. And so if we're never getting at the identity issues and questions that kids are wrestling with, and we only address the behavior, we're not helping them form a concept of integrity that is really based on who God says that they are. And so I believe a lot of the work of sexual discipleship is taking behavior and thinking of it as a symptom. Yes, it's sin, but our sin is always a symptom of something deeper. And really beginning to ask the question of what's deeper with this kid? What's going on? What are they struggling through? What wounds, what shame, what pain, what questions do they have? These are some of the things that is important for your kids to know that God says about them. And these are just a few of the things. but that they were created in his image with great value and worth, regardless of the things that they may or may not be struggling with. They were created to be in a relationship with God and other people. And I think this is really key. You know, we live in a society that sabotages the development of intimacy. Through the smartphone, kids don't learn eye-to-eye contact. They don't know how to resolve conflict. Everything then becomes sexualized. I remember teaching at a local Christian college, and after I was done teaching, a college student came up to me and she said, "Julie, I don't understand, what is intimacy if it's not sex?" She had no category for intimacy apart from sex. And we were designed for intimacy. We can't thrive without intimacy, but we can thrive throughout a lifetime without sex. And kids conflate the two. We even look at relationships between young girls that are affectionate and young girls bond. That's normal for them to bond. And when I was growing up, that would have been my best friend. But nowadays, if young girls are bonding, it immediately becomes sexualized because there's no category for needs for intimacy and connection apart from sexuality. And so we need to teach our kids the difference between intimacy and sexuality, and that they were created for deep needs for relational intimacy with God and with other people. We also need to tell them that their natural desires, and that would include some sexual desires, may be at odds with what is right. Now, notice I didn't say all sexual desire is wrong. God created them with sexual desire, and that's a good thing. But the scripture tells us that we have desires that war against our soul. And so kids that would say, "Hey, I was just born this way," or, you know, "I've always been attracted to the same gender or the same sex." It's like, hey, okay, we were all born with desires that have been twisted and marred by early experiences and even by the fall. And so let's concede that. You know, I was born a great gossiper. Yeah, I love to gossip, but I've learned that's probably not a good desire to give into. And so we can use examples of things that we crave and desire that Scripture clearly says that's a misuse of what God has given us to desire in a healthy way. And so we need to be teaching them that. We also need to let them know, and this is something that I would say to you, I need to say this to all Christians, because we don't really believe this. There is nothing beyond God's healing, redemption, and power. There's nothing that has been done to you or that you have done that is greater than the power of the cross to bring forgiveness, reconciliation, and complete healing. I can't tell you how many adults, Christian adults, I talk to who continually walk around with a cloud of sexual shame because of something that has been done to them or something that they've done. And they'll say, "Oh, I kind of know that God forgives me, but I just can't forgive myself." Or I just feel like, you know, I just need, they don't say it this way, but I need to show God how sorry I am by continually feeling upset about this thing that has been dealt with at the cross. And can I just say, friends, that lacks integrity as a Christian, because we're not walking according to the truth of what God says. Instead, we're giving into feelings of guilt and giving into feelings of shame. And young people need to hear testimonies. They need to hear stories, maybe your stories, of things that you've walked through and things that you've done, and the freedom that God has given you, not just from behavior, but freedom from the burden of shame and guilt. Because it's that shame and guilt that brings us back to sin again and again and again. And then finally, we need to let them know that while many things about you matter, and they do matter, nothing matters more than what God says about you. That to be a Christian means that we are dead to self and alive in Christ. And that walking by faith means that we walk by truth even when it doesn't feel true. And these are the messages that kids need to hear over and over again. And can we be honest? We just need to hear them over and over again too. But this is discipleship. This is not one conversation. It's the ongoing discipleship of how we integrate the truth of who Jesus is into our sexuality. So you guys with me so far? Okay, so that first step is integrity and identity. The second the second step, and this is going to go back to some of what we talked about yesterday, is integrity to the metaphor. Integrity to what God says is the purpose of our sexuality. Can anyone remember what I said yesterday about the purpose of our sexuality? Why does our sexuality matter to God? Let's see how you guys did yesterday. It's a picture of Christ in the church. So our sexuality was intentionally created to be a metaphor teaching us about God's covenant love. And we see that covenant love with the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. And as you said, we see that covenant love as a picture of Christ in the church as a New Testament. So our sexuality matters because of what it points to. It's a physical reality and experience that points us to a greater reality. Think about it. Why is it that Jesus said that there will be no marriage in heaven? Because when we're face to face with God, we no longer need the metaphor of covenant love. And so sexuality and marriage is a temporary but very holy thing that points us to a greater reality of our need and our relationship for Christ. And so what we want to teach kids about integrity is that to be a Christian means that we steward our sexuality with integrity to that metaphor. So if sexuality was intentionally created by God to be a metaphor for teaching us about his covenant love, here's some practical applications of that. First of all, sexual desire is meant to awaken us to the desire for covenant. And this is something that's really being lost in our day and age. You know, there's some research a few years ago that said that teenagers are no longer having sex with each other at the same rate as they once were. So teenagers, you don't have to worry as much about them fooling around in the back of a car. And some of us as parents say, yay, that's good news. But in reality, if you dig deeper into that research, it's actually not good news, because what they're finding instead is that teenagers are viewing sexuality as a form of self-expression and discovery, and they're separating it even from the concept of love and intimacy. And so we're getting further and further away from understanding that metaphor. And what we see really in our bodies and in Scripture is that sexual desire, romantic desire, was meant to teach us that, hey, like, we were not created to do life alone. Even if we never get married, there's this longing within us to be known and to share ourselves. And that's something that I remember telling one of my sons when he was in his teen years and struggling with sexual desire. And he's like, I don't know why God gave me this desire. And I said, hey, buddy, you know, that's God's way of showing you, even in your body, that you were not meant to do life alone. You think about teenagers, and what if there were no sexual desire? Like, what if at this youth conference, God dropped some kind of holy bomb and all sexual desire from these young men and women just was eradicated? Would that be a good thing? You said, well, maybe temporarily. Like, can we just pause it for a while? But you shook your head. Why is that not a good thing? God created it. Yeah. And what would be the ramifications if all sexual desire was gone? Yeah, we would feel no desire or no need to risk being vulnerable to go pursue a relationship. Because a relationship means the potential of rejection. And what is it that causes a young man or a young woman to move towards somebody and to risk that vulnerability, to risk that rejection, put down the Xbox controller and pursue a relationship? It's that desire, and not just the hormonal desire, but the desire to be known, to share my life with somebody. That's a good thing. And so sexual desire was meant to awaken us to covenant in a similar way that spiritual desire awakens us to seek a covenant with God. We have a relationship with God because at some point in our life, every one of us has said, there must be more to life than this. I have a need that's not getting filled. I need to seek God. I need to know him. And so desire leads us to pursue covenant. Sexual intimacy then becomes the celebration and cementing of that covenant love. I love the way that Tim Keller put this. He said, when a husband and wife have sex, what they're doing is they're remembering their vows with their body. It's like a sexual renewal covenant. It's like a celebration of their vows. They're doing with their bodies, remembering with their bodies what they've promised to do with their whole life. Now, if you know the scripture, you know that there are several covenants in the Bible. And with each covenant, there's external symbols that help us celebrate and remember that covenant. And those symbols became sacred because of what they represented. And so, for example, communion. Jesus said, do this regularly, remembering my covenant of blood. And then Paul said, do not take this symbol in an unworthy way because of what it symbolizes. Now, in a very similar way, God has given a man and a woman a physical way of cementing and symbolizing their spiritual covenant. And to take that sign outside of the covenant of marriage is similar to communion. When Paul says you eat and drink punishment on yourself, he also says when you have a sex outside of marriage, you're sinning against your own body because you're taking a holy, sacred symbol and misusing it. And then we also see that sexual fidelity is the promise of covenant. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday. But God's covenant, his covenant love is so sacred that when we are unfaithful and we break that covenant love, it breaks his heart, right? My husband and I were just reading in the book of Hosea this morning. The whole book of Hosea is taking faithfulness in marriage as a metaphor of Israel's unfaithfulness to God in covenant. And in a similar way, when we say I do, sexual faithfulness becomes so central because of the faithfulness of covenant. You know, I find it interesting. Gallup does research every year on American morality. And they ask Americans, do you think that this is a morally acceptable behavior? And as you might imagine, they've been doing this study since 2001. Every year, pretty much, Americans accept more and more things as moral, particularly in the sexual realm. So same-sex marriage, the majority of Americans think it's moral. You look at having sex outside of marriage, like 70-something% think it's fine. Divorce, like 90% think it's fine. And so on and on. More and more Americans are saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that behavior. Even polygamy, 27% of Americans said that polygamy is morally acceptable. 27%. So guess how many Americans, what percentage of Americans believe it's morally acceptable to cheat on your spouse? Any guess? 37. That's your guess? It's 10%. And it's never moved. It's always 9 or 10%. That's the only one that doesn't move. Because faithfulness is somehow written on our hearts. Like 3 times more people think it's okay to have a threesome than to be unfaithful to your marriage vows. Because covenant is written on our hearts. And so we want to teach kids and we want to model for them integrity, that we're faithful to the metaphor, that we understand God's purpose in sexuality. So I'm going to make this really practical for you, hopefully. Okay, so first of all, this means that we say no to sexual immorality. And a lot of times I'll teach this out of 1 Corinthians chapter 6. First, Paul addresses our identity in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. And then he starts moving into saying, if your body belongs to Christ, then honor God with your body, flee from sexual immorality. One of the ways that I might explain this to kids is I will again tell them how much I love Cleveland sports. And I'll say, do you know what losers Cleveland sports teams are? Anybody with me on that? Yeah? You know how we lose. Like, do I have any Cleveland sports fans in here? All right, so you're with me. We're the most loyal people on the planet. Okay, Cleveland teams will find a way to lose, even if you're up by like 20 points with 2 minutes to go. Am I not right? You're like, it's going to happen. Like you have sports PTSD. And we just, there's always next year. We always tell ourselves that, but we just are known for losing. And we had a streak of over 50 years where we didn't win a national championship, an NBA championship, a Major League Baseball championship. We've never won a Super Bowl in more than 50 years. So I would say, let's imagine that the mayor of Cleveland got sick of being losers. And he just said, you know what? We're going to pretend that the Cleveland Browns won the Super Bowl this year. So we're going to throw a huge parade in downtown Cleveland celebrating that the Cleveland Browns won the Super Bowl this year, when actually they had a losing season. So how pathetic would that be? Like, we'd be more pathetic than we already are, right? We'd be kind of like this guy. So this guy actually got a tattoo at the beginning of the football season a couple of years ago. Like, I hope he's gotten it removed. But he's celebrating something that hasn't happened. And it's ridiculous. It lacks integrity. And so I'll tell kids, when you have a sexual response to somebody that you're not married to, you're doing the exact same thing. Because you're celebrating with your bodies something that isn't true. God has given the gift of sexual intimacy to be a party, to be a parade. It's a way of celebrating and signifying the lifelong commitment of a man and a woman to the covenant of marriage. Sex is not about romantic love, and it's not about erotic love. It's about covenant love. And when we have sexual expression to pornography, or we have a hookup, or we're sexting, we're having a parade without the actual victory. And helping them understand how that lacks integrity if we really believe that God created sex to be an expression of covenant. Now, I'll also teach them, and we don't have to go too much into detail with kids, but with adults, I spend a lot of time on this. If you read 1 Corinthians chapter 6, what comes next is 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And Paul begins to address sex within marriage. And I won't read this passage. We won't get too much into it because this is not a marriage conference. But here's what I will say. To be a Christian with sexual integrity means that when we are married, when we are in the covenant of marriage, we pursue sexual intimacy within covenant. Now, please notice I did not say we have sex within covenant, because there's a very big difference between sexual activity and sexual intimacy. And there's been a lot of teaching over the years that would teach married couples that you're married, so just have sex and just check the box. And if we really understand what the Bible teaches about sexuality, it is an expression of intimate knowing that is meant to model the kind of love Christ has for his church. And if we're a married couple that has resentment towards each other, that is demanding things from one another, that is withholding things from one another, even if we're engaged in an activity that might be right, the heart attitude is not reflective of God's covenant love. So again, when I do marriage workshops, we go very deeply into what it means to build sexual intimacy and not just check a box of sexual activity. But for teenagers, for youth groups, they need to understand that God has given sex as this thing that a couple gets to work towards and enjoy. And it is something that they work towards. It doesn't immediately happen, but it's something that over time they cultivate, and they cultivate in intimacy. And young men need to know this particularly. Pornography trains our men and women now that sex is all about what I get. It's about my response. It's about my climax. It's not about the journey of love and intimacy and connection. And so there needs to be some priming and teaching in terms of just even expectations of what that looks like within marriage. All right, how are we doing on time? Goes fast. All right, so this is another way of telling them. All right, it's worth the wait. So after 50 some odd years, LeBron James won a championship for the city of Cleveland single-handedly. And we did have our celebration. And it was real. And so ESPN Sports said that the celebration that the Cavs had in winning the NBA championship was one of the top 3 sports celebration of all time. We actually had more people in downtown Cleveland for the parade than lived in the greater Cleveland area. But this is just to say, all right, God did create sex for a purpose, and he did create it to be pleasurable, and he did create it to be out of this world, and he did create it to be a journey, and he did create it to be vulnerable, and all of those elements are good, and there's a time for them to be experienced and celebrated within the covenant of marriage. All right, the third thing I would say, and this is really important, is living with sexual integrity also means integrity to the gospel. If you were to continue to read 1 Corinthians chapter 7 after Paul talks to married couples about their sex lives, here's what he says next. But I wish all of you were like me and not married, and I'm going to summarize here, because marriage can be a pain and a distraction, And he says, I would rather you just focus on your covenant with God and serving God. Now, why is this so central? It's so central because I think somewhere along the ways of us teaching kids to restrain their sexuality until marriage, and all of our efforts to elevate marriage in a culture that really degrades it, we have made marriage an idol. We have made marriage the finish line. If you even think about that purity narrative, what does it say? Maturity is getting married as a virgin. And so maturity means you have to be married. And there are a whole lot of young people, and I would say older people in the church, who have really wrestled with this because they're not married, or they got married and they were divorced, or they were widowed. And the intrinsic message is that you cannot be mature without being married. And the message is also that all of your desires and drives will be satisfied within marriage. And there are married couples sitting here that would say, yeah, that was a lie. That was a lie. And it is a lie, because you were not made for marriage. You were made for intimacy with God and intimacy within the family of God. And marriage is a beautiful gift, and it's a way that many of our desires and drives, emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, can be addressed, but it is not the end all. And so we should not use the language, and I've learned this even as a mom, that when you get married, because Paul is saying some of you should not get married. And it's not the will of God that everyone gets married. And I really find that in our day and age, we need to elevate and recover the dignity of what it is to be a single Christian that lives with sexual integrity. And whenever I teach on this, I'll always have a few people that come up to me and say, thank you, because I'm 40 and I'm single, and I've always felt like I'm on the junior varsity here. Like, people are always trying to set me up. And the assumption is that you cannot be a mature, full, wholesome, healthy Christian unless we get you married off. And I think about the scripture, and you just think about how many of Jesus's apostles were married. Do you know? All we know is that Peter was, because Jesus healed his mother-in-law. That's all we know. Now, why is it significant that we don't know? Because it didn't matter. How about Mary, Martha, and Lazarus? Like, here's a sibling group that all lived together, and the assumption is that they were not married. And it's not like Jesus is saying, hey guys, we got to get you to a youth group. Like, you're too old to be single. We don't see that, but if we were to put that story within our context today, that's what we would be thinking. And so part of helping kids understand sexual integrity is giving them messages and models that you can be a fulfilled human being and be a single person who is not in this season called to marriage and may never be called to marriage. That the fullness of life is an intimate relationship with God and a rich community, intimate relationships with other people. You see, for example, Paul, you see his letters and the emotional attachment he had with people, the connection, the friendship, the ministry partnerships he had with people. Our kids need models like this today. And one of the reasons that this is so important is when we talk about the LGBT community, the assumption that kids who are same-sex attracted are working with is, I cannot be happy unless I am romantically attached. There's no fulfillment in life without romantic attachment and sexual expression. And if my only option then is same-sex romantic attachment, and God says no, he's a cruel God. So let's challenge that assumption that God made you for romantic attachment. Romantic attachment is a good gift in life, but it's not something that's promised to all of us. God created us for deep intimacy, again, with him and in relationship. And the primary intimacy within the family of God is actually the brother-sister relationship that we all are meant to experience, and it's meant to be rich. So a lot of the work that we're doing in churches is helping highlight the importance of the single life, not to degrade marriage whatsoever, but not to make marriage the measuring mark of maturity. All right. So you're going to teach your kids all this, and you're hearing all this, and this is what your kids are going to come out of youth group feeling like. Wait, you can't hear it. Oh, you got to hear it. It's worth hearing. Let's go back. I'm going to boost this volume as high as I can.
My name is Flash.
How fast does that make you?
It means it makes really fast.
Let me see how fast.
And why do I show that? Because why did I show you it? Okay, the reason why I show that is because, we bring youth to events like this, and we show them the will of God for their life related to their sexuality. And they have an encounter with God, and they're all excited to live a different kind of life. And for about 5 minutes, it works. And this isn't just kids. We've experienced this too, right? We promise to do things differently. And the reason I show this is because, again, it emphasizes the need for discipleship. We cannot live the Christian life in our own strength. We live the Christian life by an ongoing surrender to the power of the Holy Spirit. And God just takes different parts of our life over time and over seasons, and He claims them. And we experience the power of His truth and the power of His Holy Spirit. This is why it's so critical that we take kids on a discipleship journey. We don't just give them a message of how they should live, but we walk with them and show them what it is to rely continually on more and more dependence on the Holy Spirit. So how do we actually do this? Hang on. We'll go to the next slide if I can get there. There we go. Here are some of the tools for sexual discipleship that we want to equip you with. So plan teaching times. You do want to have the sermon series and the emphasis on God's design for sex and things like that. Teachable moments, just even what's happening in youth group or what's happening in culture. Asking good questions. Again, getting to the issue underneath the behavior. So people will ask, for example, about masturbation. I'm less concerned about if a kid's masturbating and more concerned about wondering why. What role is it playing in that kid's life? Is it just an expression of, hey, I've got all these hormones I don't know what to do with? Is it attached to pornography? Is it a response to some trauma? So asking good questions. Being a space for kids to ask their questions. Like tomorrow I'll be doing, I think you call it a power track, where kids can just text in questions anonymously. We want church to be the place they ask questions, not Google. And we need to change the environment to make that a reality. Modeling from our own lives, encouragement and relationship. All right, so that's a lot. I wish I had you guys with me for like several hours. But let me just ask if we have like one or two questions as we apply this as we close. Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So as someone matures, their sexual integrity should grow. I heard one person put it this way: you only be as sexually mature as you are spiritually mature. So for example, let's say a young couple gets married and they're going into marriage, they're a Christian couple, but their level of maturity says, I got married really because I want my needs met. Okay, now you start engaging in marriage sexually and otherwise, and you realize, man, this isn't as great as I thought it was going to be. Like my spouse wants me to listen to them. I can't have what I want all the time. They frustrate me. So what does God want to do? He wants to say, okay, love is not based on how you feel. You actually can't develop mature love until you've been disappointed. And so even in that disappointment and in a sexual relationship where you're not getting your needs met and you have to care, you are very practically having to grow in understanding and knowing what it is to love like God loves. So now spiritually you're maturing and you're like, God, I can't do this. Would you give me the strength to do this? I need you to retrain my mind. That's the process of spiritual maturation, and it's going to play out in how we steward our sexuality, both within marriage and even outside of marriage. So that would be an example. Good question. Maybe one more question? Yeah. So you're talking about like teenagers? Yeah. At this level, not one that comes to mind. A few of the books that I'll recommend, I think Sean McDowell's Chasing Love is a good one. You have a recommendation, or you raise your hand? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, yeah.
It's a book called by Christopher.
Yeah, holy sexuality is good. It may you want that'd be like a mature Christian kid to be able to understand that one, but that's a really good book. Yeah, there's a lot. I have a lot that I can recommend in the older teen to young adult realm. But Chasing Love, I think, is a good one for kind of youth that lays some foundation. And then, yeah, did you have a question?
Yes. With like today's older teenagers.
Yeah, it's a really good question. How do we get to young kids before their teen years? And you're absolutely right. The foundations of how we think about sex precede adolescence. And so discipleship is really saying, okay, the world thinks this way. This is how God wants us to think about our bodies, about sexuality, even that story of sex that I shared about yesterday. Like Sam Alberry has a new kids book called God's Signpost, and he talks about how marriage points to our covenant with God. So laying some of those foundations at a very young age, then you begin to build off of them as you begin to have conversations with teenagers and preteens in terms of how to apply that to their sexuality. So I also, as we close, want to introduce my husband, Mike. Mike works with me at Authentic Intimacy, and he's better at explaining follow-up than I am. So, yeah.